Burkina Faso is not afraid of death, only of losing freedom. The strongest enemy is not the one facing us with a gun, but the one wearing the same shirt as us, hiding a knife behind his back. We must think like Sowers, not just for this season, but for the next. Freedom is never a gift. It is a fortress that must be built with blood, intelligence, and discipline. This is the president's Ibrahim Traoré speech immediately after the attempted assassination near the presidential palace in Ouagadougou. Just minutes ago, in the heart of Ouagadougou, the capital of Burkina Faso, an event unfolded that could have changed the destiny of a nation. Armed men with foreign-made equipment were seen moving stealthily towards the presidential residence. Their objective was not a single individual. It was an idea, a vision that challenged the established order. But before they could make their move, something unforeseen occurred. Hundreds of ordinary citizens, men and women, with nothing but their bare hands, turned the street into a living fortress. They stood not only for their leader, but for the soul of their country. Why has Ibrahim Traoré become the figure the West cannot tolerate? Why does the survival of one young officer mean so much that assassination becomes an option repeated over 20 times in just 3 years? And why do the people of Burkina Faso, instead of running from danger, run toward it to protect him? Stay close. This is not just another headline. This is Africa's heartbeat refusing to be silenced. Subscribe and join us in supporting a resilient Burkina Faso. The day in Ouagadougou started out like any other, but then rumors began to circulate and quickly grew into a full-blown crisis. Word traveled faster than the desert winds. They are coming again. No one asked who they were. In a nation that has faced more than 20 attempts on the life of its leader since 2022, the shadows of assassins are no longer strangers. They are a constant presence haunting every sunrise. On this day, just as the red clay roofs caught the first light, an armed group advanced toward the presidential palace. Witnesses say they carried not just rifles, but satellite communication devices, the kind associated with NATO special operations. This was not the work of amateurs. It was planned, funded, and directed by forces whose hands stretch far beyond the borders of Burkina Faso. And yet, before a single soldier could respond, the public took action. A fruit seller named Isaongo left his stand, his pockets still full of produce, and sprinted towards the commotion. Scores of young men joined him, followed by women armed with kitchenware, sounding the alarm. Motorbikes, wooden stalls, and bicycles were thrown across the street, turning the road into an improvised barricade. Within minutes, the path to the palace was no longer a road. It was a wall of human flesh and unbreakable will. History has seen this before. Patrice Lumumba in Congo, Thomas Sankara here in Burkina Faso, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. All men who dared to say no to foreign dictates. All silenced by the bullet. This time, however, history refused to repeat itself. The attackers expected a silent street. Instead, they encountered a human barricade, composed not of inert materials, but of people who were prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. The palace guards were taken aback by the sudden surge of the crowd. While strong men secured the gates, women brandished whatever they could find as makeshift weapons, creating a loud clamor that was heard throughout the surrounding areas. The message was clear. The president is not alone, and anyone who tries to harm him will have to go through the entire nation first. International agencies confirmed the attempt. AFP reported the confrontation took place only a few hundred meters from the palace. What is most alarming is not just the audacity of the gunmen, but the frequency of such plots. More than 20 attempts in less than 3 years. An unprecedented figure in modern African politics. Who commands such persistence? Who funds the shadows that keep returning? The answer lies not in Ouagadougou alone, but in the shifting sands of global power. Ibrahim Traoré, who rose from the army in 2022, refused to walk the path scripted by old powers. He revoked inequitable military pacts, expelled foreign military personnel, and sought new alliances with nations that did not require him to compromise his country's autonomy. This stance of defiance has made him both a revered figure and a prime target. The populace is well aware of this reality. As one elderly veteran declared on national television, they killed Sankara because he dreamed of freedom. This time, we will not allow history to repeat itself. His words carried the weight of memory, a warning and a vow. The day's attempted assassination was more than an act of violence. It was an admission. It revealed that sanctions had failed, propaganda had failed, and pressure had failed. When every weapon of influence proved powerless, the last resort was the assassin's bullet. But the people of Burkina Faso proved stronger than the plotters had imagined. What was intended to be a quick and decisive action turned into a public display of defiance, captured on cell phones, shared throughout Africa, and amplified by voices proclaiming, "We are all Burkina Faso." The confrontation concluded without any shots being fired by the military. The assailants disappeared as suddenly as they had arrived, but their unsuccessful attempt was not a quiet failure. It was a loud and clear message that resonated across the continent. And yet, beneath the celebration, a deeper unease remained. If assassins could appear in daylight with advanced equipment, what would stop them tomorrow? If more than 20 plots had failed, what might the 21st bring? The question that now hangs heavy over Ouagadougou is not whether they will come again, but how far the enemies of freedom are willing to go to end this struggle once and for all. As the echoes of alarm spread through Ouagadougou, the atmosphere thickened into something unforgettable. Streets that just minutes before hummed with the sound of merchants and schoolchildren were now a battlefield of voices. What began as a few brave souls stepping into danger swelled into a wave of thousands. Their chant was simple, unyielding. "No one touches our president." Then, in a moment that shifted the mood from anxiety to resolution, Ibrahim Traoré made his appearance. He was not wearing any protective gear. He did not stand behind any kind of barrier. Standing on the balcony of the presidential palace, he raised his fist high above the crowd. His voice cut through the air with the force of a verdict. "Burkina Faso is not afraid of death, only of losing freedom." The words electrified the crowd. Women ululated, young men beat drums, and elders raised their walking sticks as though blessing the moment. It was no longer merely the defense of one leader. It became the declaration of a people who refused to return to chains. The chant "freedom or death" rolled like thunder across the capital. Beyond the palace walls, news of the event spread rapidly throughout Africa. In Bamako, Mali, people spontaneously gathered in public squares to show their support. In Niamey, Niger, journalists declared that the attack was not just on an individual, but on the very foundation of the Sahel Alliance. Videos showed flags of Burkina Faso waved side by side with those of Russia, echoing the new partnerships that had replaced old colonial ties. The reaction of ordinary citizens revealed something extraordinary. Farmers rode more than 300 kilometers on motorbikes just to stand guard at the National Square. Mothers brought their children declaring, "If he falls, we all fall." For them, Traoré's survival was not about politics. It was about dignity, bread, and the right to decide their own future without foreign dictates. But as the people celebrated their own resilience, the response from abroad carried venom. Western media outlets were quick to brand him as an authoritarian leader, suggesting that the public support was a result of coercion and propaganda. They presented images of the large crowds, but portrayed them as individuals being manipulated by a military regime. In their view, the popular uprising was not a genuine expression of support, but a sign of a society in turmoil. Inside diplomatic circles, the pressure mounted. Sanctions were tightened. Aid was frozen. The narrative in international media grew louder. Instability, dictatorship, regional threat. It was a carefully crafted chorus designed to cast doubt not only abroad, but also within the hearts of his own citizens. And yet the opposite occurred. Every failed attempt, every hostile headline only deepened the bond between leader and people. The assassination attempts no longer weakened his image, they strengthened it. To see him alive, unafraid, and speaking to the public without any protection was to see courage in its purest form. The people did not see this as a sign of overconfidence, but as a demonstration of his faith in them. A particularly moving moment occurred when an elderly man who had lived through the revolutionary period gave an interview on national television. His voice trembled, but his words were iron. They killed Sankara because he dared to dream. This time we will not let history repeat itself. That testimony drawn from the scarred memory of a generation became a rallying cry that no bullet could silence. And yet beneath the jubilation laid a whisper of unease. If foreign-backed attackers could appear in broad daylight equipped with advanced gear, what did tomorrow hold? Every cheer carried the shadow of a question. How long before the next attempt? The palace itself became a symbol not of vulnerability, but of transformation. Once the private domain of power, it was now ringed by citizens, farmers, workers, mothers, and schoolchildren, forming an unbroken circle of defense. The streets of Ouagadougou no longer belonged to soldiers alone. They belonged to a people who had chosen to stand shoulder to shoulder against the storm. But if the people had shown their willingness to risk their lives for their leader, the opponents of freedom were equally resolute, and their tactics would soon go beyond physical attacks to target the very core of the nation. The day after the failed assassination, Ouagadougou seemed calm, but it was not the calm of peace. It was the quiet of a city that had looked death in the eye and refused to blink. Markets reopened, children went to school, and farmers brought their harvest to town. But under the surface, everything had changed. The country had entered a new phase of its struggle. The first and most immediate impact was economic. Foreign credit lines were cut once more, and sanctions tightened like a noose around the nation's fragile trade. Banking restrictions made it harder to import essential goods. Fuel prices rose and merchants complained of dwindling supplies. In the past, such actions might have successfully crushed the resolve of a small nation. However, instead of giving in to hopelessness, the people of Burkina Faso looked inward for solutions. Farmers committed to increasing domestic food production. Community leaders adopted the slogan, "Buy what we make and make what we buy." This was not just a matter of survival. It was a powerful assertion of their independence. The second impact was social. The assassination attempt revealed how vulnerable the nation could be. But instead of paralyzing the people, it mobilized them. Women organized night patrols with whistles and drums, guarding neighborhoods against intruders. School teachers trained children to recognize strangers and raise the alarm. Young men joined the volunteer defense brigades while elders offered their knowledge of the land for strategic planning. A new social fabric emerged, woven with threads of vigilance and collective duty. Yet the most dangerous consequences were political. For while external threats had been expected, the real shock came from within. Reports surfaced that confidential files on the nation's uranium program had been stolen and carried across borders. Worse yet, the individuals thought to have leaked the information were not foreign spies, but high-ranking military officers who had taken an oath to protect the country. This was a betrayal that was more painful than any physical wound. Ibrahim Traoré addressed the nation with a serious tone. He did not raise his voice. His demeanor was composed, but his words were heavy with meaning. He cautioned that the most formidable foe is not always the one who attacks from the outside, but sometimes the one who is already inside the camp, feigning loyalty. His statement resonated deeply with citizens who remembered the history of coups, assassinations, and betrayals that had scarred African politics for decades. This dual reality, external aggression, and internal treachery pushed the country into a new political climate. The state tightened its grip, increasing surveillance and expanding the role of community watchdog groups. The press, already under pressure, faced further restrictions as the government sought to control narratives that could destabilize morale. Critics accused the leadership of silencing opposition, while supporters claimed it was a necessary measure to protect the country during a time of crisis. The paradox of the situation was evident. Each attack strengthened the connection between the leader and the people, but it also increased the country's isolation on the world stage. Each unsuccessful assassination attempt brought the people together, but each new sanction hurt the economy. And so a question arose among citizens. How much longer could they endure? Could the collective will of farmers, traders, women, and youth outlast the pressure of global superpowers and the knives of traitors? Or would the unity forged in fire eventually fracture under the weight of scarcity and suspicion? This is the heart of the political drama. A leader who stands as a symbol of defiance, a people who refuse to bow, and a world order determined to see both broken. The stakes are not only national survival, but the very definition of African independence in the 21st century. Do you believe that unity can overcome betrayal? We invite you to share your opinions in the comments section. The future of Africa may be shaped by voices like yours. But while the people were dealing with hunger, betrayal, and sanctions within their own country, powerful nations in other parts of the world were already planning their next move in the struggle for influence in Africa. Outside the borders of Ouagadougou, the failed assassination attempt set in motion a storm of international reactions. In Washington, officials wasted no time in placing the country on a special watch list. The justification was couched in the language of regional security and nuclear safety concerns, a diplomatic phrase that often signals the possibility of intervention. Statements from the State Department warned that the leadership was destabilizing West Africa while simultaneously freezing aid and suspending trade arrangements. France, once the colonial master, responded with sharper edges. Credit lines were cut, commercial ties restricted, and diplomatic pressure increased. French media depicted the situation as a sign of disorder under the new government, consistently using the term dictatorship in their reporting. Opinion pieces in Parisian newspapers presented a clear picture of a government that was becoming increasingly authoritarian. However, not all countries shared this perspective. In Moscow, officials condemned the assassination attempt and declared that any further attack on the country's leadership would be seen as a hostile act against sovereignty itself. Rio framed its support not merely as alliance, but a solidarity with the people, reclaiming dignity. Beijing followed suit, offering promises of economic cooperation without political conditions, signaling a new balance of power in Africa. Perhaps the most surprising player was Pyongyang. Reports confirmed that 700 North Korean commandos had been deployed to fortify the capital. They did more than guard. They provided training to local military units on how to defend urban areas and how to counter drone attacks. The international press portrayed this as evidence of an authoritarian regime from Asia expanding its reach. However, for the people in the country, it represented a strengthening of their defenses against unseen threats. Meanwhile, across Africa, the incident sparked a wave of mobilization. In Bamako and Niamey, marches declared solidarity with their neighbor, framing the attack not as a domestic plot, but as a strike against the Sahel alliance itself. Independent journalists in Niger called it an assault on the beating heart of the Sahel. Diplomatically, the battlefield widened. Western delegations pressed the United Nations to condemn the government, while Russian and Chinese representatives vetoed resolutions that could justify intervention. The result was a deadlock. A Cold War in miniature played out within the halls of global institutions. This clash of narratives revealed what was really at stake. For the Western powers, it was a matter of maintaining their influence, securing access to resources, and keeping Africa in a position of dependence. For Russia, China, and their allies, it was an opportunity to promote a different kind of global order. And for the people of the Sahel, it was a question of survival, of being able to make their own decisions without interference from Paris, Washington, or Brussels. Yet beyond the speeches and sanctions, a heavier burden remained. How would a small nation chart its own destiny when giants circled on every side, waiting for the next moment of weakness? The morning after the attempted assassination faded into history, but the question remained, what comes next? Burkina Faso now stands at a crossroads, not just for itself, but for the entire Sahel. The choices the nation faces are difficult, and each one carries the hopes of an entire continent. The first option is to give in. If sanctions continue to escalate, if the country becomes more isolated, and if internal divisions weaken its resolve, It could be pulled back into the sphere of foreign influence. It would mean returning to an old cycle, dependency on aid, military bases dictated by outsiders, and policies written not in Ouagadougou, but in Paris or Washington. For those who still remember the decades of submission, this is the nightmare scenario. The second part is resistance. Here lies the gamble of building alliances with partners who ask no price for sovereignty. It means embracing regional solidarity through the Sahel Alliance, pursuing economic self-sufficiency, and defending every inch of independence. This road demands sacrifice, hunger, uncertainty, constant vigilance, but it also promises the dignity of deciding one's own future. In this struggle, the significance of Ibrahim Traoré extends beyond his individual role. He has come to represent a larger issue. Can Africa in the 21st century finally break free from the logic of colonial dependency? If Burkina Faso succeeds, it will not only secure its own destiny, but set a precedent for others across the continent. If it fails, the message will be equally loud that no nation can stand alone against the combined weight of global powers. Elders across villages remind the youth of a truth once voiced by Thomas Sankara. You cannot carry out fundamental change without a certain amount of madness. Today, that madness is the refusal to accept that Africa must always be a pawn on someone else's chessboard. In the chants of students, in the songs of artists, and in the speeches at crowded squares, the same idea is repeated. We must have freedom, or we will not exist. However, the path forward is not solely about opposition. It is also about progress. The test for Burkina Faso and its supporters is to transform their defiance into tangible improvements, to feed its people, to educate its children, to build an economy that cannot be strangled by a sanction or toppled by a rumor. Only then can freedom be more than survival. It can be prosperity. The choices are urgent and the stakes are higher than ever. For Africa's elders who witnessed the fall of Lumumba and Sankara, this moment feels like history returning for a second chance. For the young, it feels like a fire that cannot be extinguished. And so the stage is set. The issue is no longer about a single event or a single leader. It is about whether a continent can take control of its own future. The answer will be found in the actions of those who decide to stand together or to fall apart. From the crowded markets of Ouagadougou to the farthest villages of the Sahel, one truth has become undeniable. This is no longer the story of a single leader, but of a people who refuse to bow. The world has watched bullets fly, sanctions tighten, and shadows creep in the night. And yet the people have stood again and again as shields of flesh and fire. Their defiance is not just anger. It is a declaration that dignity is worth more than life itself. We cannot ignore the sorrow. Africa has seen too many dreams cut short. Patrice Lumumba silenced in Congo. Thomas Sankara struck down here in Burkina Faso. Mr. Gaddafi was violently removed from power in Libya. Each of these names represents a painful memory in the history of the continent, and each one serves as a stark reminder. Freedom, once taken away, is not easily regained. But amidst the grief and the fury, hope burns brighter than despair. When Ibrahim Traoré raised his fist and told his people that death itself was not to be feared, but the loss of liberty was, he gave voice to something eternal. And when the crowds answered with their bodies, their drums, and their chants, they proved that one man may be targeted, but the movement of millions cannot be killed. This is why today matters. This is why tomorrow must not be left to chance. If the world believes Africa's story is written only in submission, then the people of this land are determined to prove otherwise. If this story resonates with you, do not keep it to yourself. Share it, like it, and spread the word. Subscribe because our history has been suppressed for too long, and now our future deserves to be celebrated. Write it in the comments. Let the world see your voice. New Africa. Africa rise. Africa can do it. It's time for Africa. For the enemies of freedom, the survival of Ibrahim Traoré is their nightmare. For the people of Burkina Faso, his survival is their vow. And for the whole continent, it is the spark of a fire that says, we will not live in chains. We will rise in freedom.